Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Aleph, Daf 71 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, alright, well, who could tell me what Daf 71 talks about? Excuse me 1 second. Let me stretch a little bit. Yawn a little bit. Alright. Well, we're talking about like Truma and stuff. Why not? Friends, we're going to start on Daf Ayin Beis, 2 lines to the bottom. Hashtu the Omar Bo Lidrashe Huda also. Okay, so now that we're saying Bo teaches us a drasha, what does that mean? Well, we had said that Umolsa also as Yochal Bo. It says by the Korban Pesach that if you have an Eved or children, so then you have to give them bris milah, and then you can eat Korban Pesach. We say Dafka by Bo Milah Zchar V'Avodah Makeves, but not by Truma. Okay, so Kilu, an oral is not allowed to eat Truma, but if he has a bris milah, but his son doesn't have a bris milah, or his avodim don't have a bris milah, he could still eat Truma, just they cannot. With Masha'en Kain by the Korban Pesach, he would not be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach if he has sons or avodim that need a bris milah. Now that you say that Bo is teaching us like an exclusionary thing, when it says by Korban Pesach that a ben nechar, a fellow shnisnachnu ma'asav l'avos b'shamayim, that if a fellow is being a shtickle nudnik, so he's not allowed to Korban Pesach. So lomali, so what do we learn from there? So bo amor es das poselos and amor es das poselos b'maiser. That when it comes to Korban Pesach, yeah, if you're a shtickle nudnik, you can't eat Korban Pesach, but by maiser sheni, you can eat maiser sheni even if you're a nudnik. Good to know. Kol oral lo yochal bo. It says any fellow who's an oral, so he's not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. Lomali, what do we learn out from there? Bo in ochel, it doesn't eat Korban Pesach. Avo ochlu b'matzah mor. Oh, an oral would eat matzah and mor. All right. What do you want me to tell you? V'tzrich michtav oral, v'tzrich michtav kol ben nechar, and we needed both of these cases. We need to say that an oral doesn't eat Korban Pesach. We need to say that a ben nechar doesn't need a Korban Pesach because of achman oral. Because if the Torah would have only said an oral, okay, mishum demais, because he's disgusting. Aval ben nechar d'lomais emelo. But a ben nechar, he's not disgusting. He's just a nudnik. So maybe I think he can eat Korban Pesach. So because of achman kol ben nechar mishum dein liba l'shamayim. And if the pasuk only would mention a ben nechar, that's because he's not interested in serving the Eibishter. Aval oral d'liba l'shamayim emelo. But an oral who is interested in serving the Eibishter, so maybe I'll say that he would be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach tzricha, therefore we need both cases. Mimenu lomali. Why does it say mimenu a few times, right? A few times in the context of Korban Pesach, it says mimenu. So l'chid'Rabba Rabbi Yitzchak. So that's because of Rabba Rabbi Yitzchak that we're going to get to in another few days. So hold your horses. Omer Mai, we said earlier, Rabbi Akiva, Omer says Rabbi Akiva eno tzarich. Oh, what's it? Okay, what do you want me to tell you? Omer Mai, we said earlier, Rabbi Akiva, Omer says Rabbi Akiva, eno tzarich. So he learns out that an oral is not allowed to eat truma from a different source, right? We had been learning about the Gzeir Shaveh of Toshav V'Sachir. It says that by Korban Pesach, it says it by truma. Rabbi Akiva learned it out from a different source, which is that it says ish in the context of truma, to which we say that right, really in the context of people who are not allowed to eat truma, and the inclusionary nature of ish comes to include an oral. So again, so Omer Mar, we said earlier, Rabbi Akiva, Omer says Rabbi Akiva eno tzarich. You don't need the Gzeir Shaveh because I already Omer, because after all the pasuk says ish l'Rabbos is oral. In the context of people who are not allowed to eat truma, it says ish to include an oral. Maybe I'll say that ish is coming to include an onen, that an onen is not allowed to eat truma. Yossi Bab Chanina, as we saw yesterday, says of Yossi Bab Chanina on Makra v'chol, that the pasuk says that any zar, non-Kohen is not allowed to eat truma. Zaru samartilach, I said a non-Kohen is not allowed to eat truma v'lo aninos, but an onen would be allowed to eat truma. If you have a Kohen who's an onen, so he's allowed to eat truma. Aim of la relus. Wait, maybe I'll say that a zara is not allowed to eat truma, but an orel can eat truma. So aksiv ish, but we have the pasuk that says ish to teach us that an orel is not allowed to eat truma. Umara Isa, but how come Ish teaches us that Orel is not allowed to eat Truma, and the Chazar teaches that an Onen is allowed to eat Truma? Maybe it's vice versa. Punkt fakert. Right? Maybe Take, an Orel is allowed to eat Truma, and an Onen is not. So Mustava Arelus Havlele Rabuye, it makes sense that it's the Orel who's not allowed to eat Truma. How come? Shekain Maisim Krusim Bidvar Eved or Ovid? I guess Eved. I feel like Ovid would be with a Aleph. Also because it's talking about Eveds. Okay, Maisim Krusim Bidvar Eved. What do you want me to tell you? That it's like a acronym kind of thing. Mechusar Maise Umaise Begufo, right? That's the Maisim, right? That when it comes to an Orel, he's lacking action. He needs to take action to give himself a bismillah. Umaise begufo. It applies to his body. Vanush kares, and it's something that will be chayiv kares for if he doesn't sort out. V'yeshnu lifnei dibur, and it applies also before Matan Torah. Umila zchar v'avodav ma'keves, and also when it comes to the milah of his sons and his avodim, so it will prevent him from eating korban pesach. So we see that Arelus is pretty serious, and therefore, if you're an Orel, you're not allowed to eat Truma. No, I'll say that the opposite. Punkt fakert. That in Onen is not allowed to eat Truma because shekin yeshna b'chol shah. It can apply any time, right? Bismillah, you give yourself a bismillah, and zeh, you move on with your life. In Onen, at any time, somebody could pass away, and then it could happen at any time. Onen applies to men and women. And there's really nothing you can do to prevent it from happening in the future. So, Hanach Nefishan, like we saw yesterday, we say, yeah, but by Arelus, there was more. There were 5 examples by Arelus, but only 3 by Onen. Rav Amar, below Hanach Nefishan, Nami lo Matzah Amar. Rav says that even without saying that Arelus has more than Aninus, still you would be unable to say that Onen is the one that is excluded from being able to eat Truma, because Amar Kra Ish Ezu Davar Sheshnu Beish Ve'enu Beisha Havil Mizarelus. Because the pasuk in the context of who's not allowed to eat Truma says Ish, and who is somebody, and what's something, right? Ish means men, not women. Bris Milah is something that only applies to men. Lamais, it doesn't apply to women. So therefore, what is being excluded? Who's excluded from being able to eat Truma? An Orel. Rabbi Kiva Aitosha V'Sachar Me'ovedle. What does Rabbi Kiva learn out from Tosha V'Sachar? Right? Rabbi Eliezer learns out from Tosha V'Sachar the Gzeira Shaveh, to say, from which we learn out that an Orel is not allowed to eat Truma. But Rabbi Kiva learns it out from Ish. So what does he do with Tosha V'Sachar? So Amar of Shmaya says of Shmaya La'asuye Aravi Mohu V'Gevoni Mohu. It comes that from Tosha V'Sachar we include that if you have a Arab fellow who has a bris milah in the Arab version, or a Givoni fellow who has the Givoni version of bris milah, so they would not be allowed to eat korban pesach, even though they have a circumcision, but it's not blessed by the rabbi, so doesn't work. So you can't eat korban pesach. So what do you want me to tell you? And that's learned out according to Rabbi Kiva from Tosha V'Sachar. V'ane mulin ninu frekti Gemara. But one second, what's the havamina? Of course they're not considered mulin. Of course they're not considered having bris milah to the extent that they would be allowed to eat korban pesach. The fellow says, I ain't getting no hanoah whatsoever from anybody who's an Orel. Orel's me like oil and water. Mutar ba'or Yisrael, but he's still allowed to get benefit from a Yid who doesn't have a bris milah. V'asu b'muli of the Chavim, but he would not be allowed to get benefit from a Gentile who does not have a bris milah. So, right, an uncircumcised Gentile. So, the point being that even a Gentile with a circumcision still would be not considered, somebody with a bris milah legabe korban pesach. So memela we would exclude an Aravi mahul or a Givoni mahul. So and continues the Mishnah Kodem Shani Nene Lemulin. And if a fellow says, I'm not getting any benefit from anybody with the bris milah, so mutar b'mulei of the kochavim, So that doesn't apply then to Gentiles with a circumcision. Also be'orle Yisrael, but he would nonetheless be also to a yid who doesn't have a bris milah. So the point being that even a yid without a bris milah wouldn't be considered. Even a yid without a bris milah is still considered, like he has a bris milah relatively speaking. Because when it comes to nidarim, as Rashi says, it says halech achel lashon bnei adam. It was based on the colloquial use, and therefore you wouldn't refer to a yid as an orel, and you wouldn't refer to a Gentile as somebody who's mahul. So therefore, the point being that mimele, we wouldn't consider an Aravi mahul or Givoni mahul to be fit to eat korban pesach. So what's the abmina? So rather, according to Rabbi Akiva, what we learn out from Toshav V'Sachir is that even if you have a fellow who converted to Judaism and he went to the mikvah, the opposite. He converted to Judaism and he did bris milah, but he didn't yet go to the mikvah. Or you have a baby who was born mahul, who I guess didn't he was born without a foreskin. So Kasav Tzarech La'ativ Menu Dam Bris, and Rabbi Akiva says, look, they still would not, right? They would be unable to eat korban pesach, right? Or this, parent would be unable to eat korban pesach, even if the child was born mahul, still you'd have to do atafas dam bris. So therefore, what are we talking about? Where am I? What am I doing? Who am I? Reset. I think my brain just got deleted. Where am I? Who am I? What am I doing over here? Why am I holding this book? Alright, what are we talking about? Okay, so Rabbi Akiva says that from ish we say that an orel is not allowed to eat truma. So what do we learn out from Toshav V'Sachir? So it says Rabbi Akiva teaches that even if you have a ger shemav lo tavel, or if you have a tinok who was born mahul, still that would not be considered significant, and that's learned out from Toshav V'Sachir. Rabbi Eliezer at the time. Now Rabbi Eliezer, so how does he learn out that ger shemav lo tavel, or how does he learn out a cotton who was born mahul? Nolad mahul. So, well, guess what? Interestingly, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is to Amr ger shemav lo tavel ger ma'al yehu. Rabbi Eliezer actually says that a ger shemav lo tavel is completely fine. V'ksav cotton kishenolad mahul ain't tzarich la'ativ menu dam bris. And that Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is also that by a cotton who was born mahul, so you actually don't need to do dam bris. So actually, Rabbi Eliezer would say that these cases are completely fine. Rabbi Eliezer, ish my avidle. So what does Rabbi Eliezer do with ish, the pasuk that Rabbi Akiva uses to learn out that in Orel is not allowed to eat truma? Devatar kloshim bnei adam. Oh, ish, meh. Nothing to learn out over there. The Torah was just speaking colloquially. People say ish. What do you want me to tell you? Friends, do you say ish? I say ish all the time. Ish. Like whenever I need something, I just say like ish, You do that too, right? That's actually interesting to think about. In what context would you think we can use ish? Like in what context would you just go ish? That would be interesting. Maybe we could think about a way to incorporate ish into I wonder how. Ish. I don't know, how do I do it? Ish. Maybe you go to the supermarket and you're maybe when you're opening up your wallet to pay, you say give them your card, your credit card, and ish. Maybe that's where you use it. Ish. Hey, you take out your credit card to pay for grapefruits, and you say ish. Alright, try it out. Let me know how it goes. Weiter. By Rav Chama bar Ukva says Rav Chama bar Ukva, Kain Aro Ma'u L'Suchel B'Shemen Shel Truma. So if you have a baby, he's just born, he's not yet 8 days old, so he doesn't have bris milah because he's too young to have a bris milah. So can you rub oil of truma into this little fellow? So now we say that rubbing oil of truma is like consuming oil of truma, and so in oil is not allowed to eat truma. So do we say, right? So do we say that look, this little fellow is an oil, but the Maisa is only an oral because you can't do the bris milah yet, he's too young. So is that considered an oral to the extent that you'd be unable to rub oil into the little fellow if it's truma? Or do we say, no, look, right? I don't remember what I said. Kilu, do we say it's not allowed or do we say it is allowed? What do you want me to tell you? Amr Abzer says, Abzer Tashma, come in here. Ein li ela mila zchar b'shas asiya v'avadav b'shas achila. Okay, if you look at the pasuks, what do the pasuks say? I don't know. What do the pasuks say? V'az yikrav la so. So it says by milas zcharav v'avadav that then he will go to do it. And it says by no, it says by milas zcharav v'az yikrav la so. It says by milas avadav of az yochabo. So we want to say that the pasuk about doing bris milah for your children is regarding when you slaughter the Korban Pesach, whereas for your avadim would be when you eat the Korban Pesach. So obviously slaughtering the Korban Pesach is earlier in the day than when you eat it that night. So how do we know that nonetheless both apply, right? That kilu, that when it comes to your children, they would have to, whether it was at the time of doing or at the time of eating, and the same thing by your slaves. So let's go weiter for a second. So it's Tamil Oz Gzeir Shava. So it says Oz by both them for Gzeir Shava. Now, Bishlama Avodov Mishkachas Lo Isnu B'Shas Achila V'Isnu B'Shas Asiya. So we're trying to find out, friends. Now listen up. We're trying to find out a situation, right? Because we have two situations here, right? We have the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach, which happens in the afternoon of the 14th of Pesach, and then we have the 14th of Nisan, like we learned in Masechet Pesachim, and then you have the eating of the Korban Pesach, which happens that night. So what we're trying to say is that you need, right, that bris milah for your avadim is both at the time of doing of slaughtering the Korban Pesach in the afternoon, as well as eating the Korban Pesach that night. Same thing applies to your children. You have to, right, doing bris milah for your children would apply both at the time of eating, of slaughtering the Korban Pesach, as well as when you eat it later that night. So we're trying to figure out, well, what could be a situation where at the time that you slaughtered the Korban Pesach, it wasn't yet relevant, but now at the time that you're coming to eat the Korban Pesach, all of a sudden it's relevant. Like, for example, if you have a child and you do bris milah for the child before you slaughter the Korban Pesach, so okay, you did it already before the slaughtering. Memela, then he's already has a bris milah by the time they're going to eat it. Like, what would be a situation where doing bris milah would be not relevant before the slaughtering, but all of a sudden it's relevant by the time you come to eat it later on? Like, how could that work out? So we say that when it comes to the slaves, right? So it says bishlama avodav. I understand in the situation of avodim how you can have a situation like that. Mishkachos ladisnu b'shas achila v'lesnu b'shas asiya. I can have a situation where all of a sudden bris milah of your avodim becomes relevant at the time that it comes to eat the Korban Pesach, even though it was not relevant earlier when you slaughtered the Korban Pesach. Well, let's say you hadn't yet purchased this eved at the time of the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach, right? The afternoon of the 14th, you hadn't yet purchased the eved. After you slaughtered the Korban Pesach, you purchased the eved. So then comes the time to eat it. You're going to have to by then do bris milah for the eved, right? So therefore we say, even if it only became relevant in between the slaughtering and the eating of the Korban Pesach, you're not going to be able to eat the Korban Pesach unless you have it as a bris milah. How can you have a situation where you have a child who was born 7 days earlier, and then now it's Erev Pesach, and it's also the 8th day, and at the time that you slaughtered the Korban Pesach, he wasn't yet shaykh for the mitzvah of bris milah, but at the time that you eat the Korban Pesach, now he was shaykh, and you have to make sure that you do bris milah before you eat the Korban, in order for you to be able to eat the Korban Pesach. I mean, of course, bris milah you already do from early in the morning, right? So if that, right, you can already do from the morning. So therefore, comes the morning of Erev Pesach, you could have already done bris milah for this fellow, which means that, what would be a situation where bris milah only becomes relevant in between the slaughtering and the eating of the Korban Pesach? So, how can you have that? Well, is it not talking about where the baby was born? You hear that? The Gemara wants to have a havmina to say that, well, it's talking about where the baby was born in between when you slaughtered and you ate the Korban Pesach, and now when you eat the Korban Pesach, you can't eat it unless the baby has a bris milah. But shmamina areilus shelo bizmana havi areilus, and we want to say that based on that, so you see that even areilus before 8 days is considered areilus, that the baby is now born between the slaughtering and the eating of the Korban Pesach, and we're saying that it's considered an oral, and you're not going to be able to eat the Korban Pesach. So we see that even a reilus before the 8 days is considered significant. Rava v'tizba, 1 second. Rava says that doesn't make any sense. Himolo kol zacher Rachman of Azikav Laso. So the pasuk says you have to do bris milah, and that right for your males, and then you can eat, and then you can offer, then you can do the korban pesach. V'hayla bar mahilahu. This baby who was just born in between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach, he's not 8 days old yet. You can't do bris milah yet. So clearly, it's not talking about when the baby was born in between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach. Rather, it's talking about where the baby was sick, right? He had a fever, and then the fever let up between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach. But if he was sick and then he got better in between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach, well, from the time that he gets better, he's going to have to wait another 7 days. So you wouldn't just be able to do bris milah immediately when the fever goes away. Well, it's talking about where actually the fever had gone away a week prior. And now Erev Pesach is 7 days after the fever went away. And that's why we're talking about, right, doing bris milah. But v'nimahali mitzafra. But why not then do bris milah on the morning of Erev Pesach? Why does it have to be davka in between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach? So the inon me'es leis. So and for the Gemara, because we need it to be exactly 24 hours times 7. And therefore, if the fever went away 7 days prior at, 2 in the afternoon, so we're going to need then to do the bris milah exactly 7 days later. 24 times 7 hours later is going to be when the bris milah happens, and that turns out to be Erev Pesach between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach. Frag the Gemara, V'atani luda, but didn't luda say Yom Havraito ki Yom Ivaldo, that the day that the fellow gets better is like the day that he's born. My Yom Ivaldo lo ba'inu me'es le'es, av Yom Havraito lo ba'inu me'es le'es, which would mean that just like the day that he's born, so you wait 7 more days, right? You wait till the 8th day, and then it doesn't have to be exactly from the time he was born, already from the morning that works. So then I would say the same thing also, that when 7 days after the fever goes away, so already from the morning you can do bris milah. Lo adif Yom Havraito Yom Ivaldo, di ilu Yom Ivaldo lo ba'inu me'es le'es, ve'ilu Yom Havraito ba'inun me'es le'es. No, actually the day that that the fever goes away is actually more stringent than the day that he's born, and that the day that he's born, you wait another 7 days, and then you can do bris milah from the morning, whereas the day that he gets better, you actually do have to wait me'es leis. So we want to say that is the situation where bris milah for your son would be relevant only between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach, which is when he had a fever, and the fever went away 7 days prior, in the afternoon, like between when you would slaughter and eat your korban pesach, and then bris milah is ma'akev. You have to do bris milah for this yingel in order to eat the korban pesach. Rav Papa Amar says, Rav Papa could go into chayiv le'ene li'yinuka v'itpach b'nei uveni. Rav Papa says, look, I could tell you that it's talking about a situation where his eyes were bothering him. It wasn't like a fever. It wasn't something that like when he feels better, he's going to have to wait a whole week. His eyes were bothering a shtickle. And then that went away, and it only went away in between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach. Rava Omer can go and show you Rava says it could be talking about where his father and mother were locked up in jail at the time of the slaughtering of the korban pesach, and they had a messenger slaughter the korban pesach for them, but then they got out of jail, and they still had to do bris milah for their son, so they had to do it between the slaughtering and the eating of the korban pesach. Rav Kana Brei de Rav Nechemia Omar can go on tum shenikra v'nimtza zachar b'nei uveni. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Well, would you look at that? We're talking about a tumtum, a fellow who it's unclear if he's a male or a female. And guess what? We found out between slaughtering and eating the korban pesach, it turned out that he's a boy, and well, we gotta do bris milah. Rav Sherevia Amar Kigon Shehotzi Rosho Chutz Lefruzdor. You hear that? Rav Sherevia says it's talking about where this little fellow is born in a sort of interesting way. His body came out of his head came out of his mother, and then it just kind of waited for like a week, and then the rest of his body came out in between the slaughtering and the eating of a korban pesach a week later. At least that's what I understand it to mean. But can a baby live like that? The that once a baby comes out into the world, all of a sudden his mouth opens up and his belly button navel thing where he gets his nutrients from his mother closes, and now he's going to have to nurse. And if that wouldn't happen, then he wouldn't be able to live at all. So now the thing is, once the baby's mouth opens and stuff, he needs to nurse. How can the baby nurse if he's like only his head is sticking out for a week? So my skin could go in dizanse ishta. Well, I don't know, he had a fever, and the fever somehow was able to like sustain him. This is interesting. I don't know anything about this stuff. Maybe Sharna can fill us in, but I'm out of my league over here. I'm out of my leagues on most things, but this is included. Ishta deman. Now, whose fever would be sustaining the baby? Lema ishta dide. If it's the baby's fever, yachi kol shiva boy. But if that's the case, then when when the fever goes away, he's gonna have to wait another 7 days. That for this week, while his head was sticking out of the body of his mother's fever kept him alive or something. If you want to say, or you could say that when we say that if like the head pops out but the body's still in there, so he won't live, that is only if he's not crying. But if he's crying, so his crying will keep him, warm, and then he can live or something. Friends, I have no clue what that means. All right. Amr b'yochanan b'shem bano. Says b'yochanan the name of bano. Oral makabel azah. All right. A fellow who's an oral, he can, if he's like tmei meis, you can sprinkle para aduma water on him. All right. Because we see that our forefathers got sprinkled on when they were tmei meis, when they were orals. Kshein arelim. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, that the nation came out of the Jordan on the 10th of the first of Nisan. Right, when they got into Eretz Yisrael, Basar lo mahile, and they didn't do bris milah on the 10th of Nisan, mishum choshad orcha, because they were, tired from traveling that day. Hazaa emos avedu. Now, when did they do the, when did they sprinkle the ephah paraduma on them to get rid of tmei meis, tumas hameis? Lav kshin arelim, was it not on the 10th of Nisan when they were arelim, and they did hazaa even when they were arelim? Vidilma lo avud pesach klal, but maybe they didn't do korban pesach at all that year. Lo sakadatech. No, that can't be, right? Meaning, because we're saying that maybe they had to have, hazah, they got sprinkled in the mechatas, in the mei paraduma, so that, mei efer paraduma, so that they could offer the korban pesach. Maybe they partially didn't offer the korban pesach that year. Lo sakadatech. Narishkeit. Nonsense. Tichsiv, the pasuk says, v'yaisu is a pesach, that they partially did the korban pesach. Maskefla. Sure, maybe they did korban pesach. Maybe it was a pesach that they offered in a state of tumah, right? Tumah hutru b'tzibur or the chuyu b'tzibur, right? We saw those machlokas in Masechta Psachim. Amar Rav Ashi Tanya beheja malu v'tavlu v'asu peschein v'tayr. No, says Rav Ashi, look, we have a brayse that explicitly says that they did milah. They went to the mikvah and they did the korban pesach in a state of tahara. So we see then that if they wanted to offer the korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan, they had to have have the efer paraduma on the 10th of Nisan, 4 days earlier. I guess in the first application would have been 3 days before that, I imagine. So they are offering, so they were doing the mechatas, the paraduma, in a state of tuma, in a state of orla, that they were orals, and they were able to get paradumad. Amr Rabba bar Yitzchak Amr Rav lo nitna priyas mila laVavram Avinu. That says Rabba bar Yitzchak that by Avram Avinu, when they got bris milah, they didn't get priya, right? Bris milah, right? There's two parts: removing the orla, and then also pulling back some kind of like membrane or something. So that pulling back the membrane or something thing wasn't given to Avram Avinu. Shneimar beisayi Amar Hashem al Yoshua, that the Eibishter said to Yoshua, Asi l'chochavos tzurim, go and make swords and circumcise the people with swords. Okay. Vidilma hanach delo mahu. But maybe that was just, right, so we want to say that that's referring to priya. Maybe though it was just referring to like the people needed bris milah. The pasuk says, Kimulim hayukiya kol ama yotzim v'chol ama yilodim v'gomer, that all of the nation that was born in the desert didn't have bris milah. So imkain mashuv. But if it was just simply that, they had to make swords in order to do bris milah for the people, so then why does it say shuv a second time? Elalav lefriya, the second time is referring to the second step, the second part, which is priya. Umay shenis, okay, but in addition to shuv, it says shenis. What's shenis? Lakushi sof mila l'tchilas mila, to compare the end of the bris milah to the beginning of the bris milah. Just like the beginning of the bris milah, the removing of the orla is important, so also whatever is left over also needs to be removed. Matchilas milah ma'akeves, avsof milah ma'akeves, ma'akvim. Just like the first step of bris milah is necessary, so also making sure that everything that needs to be removed is in fact removed. The Tananas we learned in Mishnah, these are the parts of the foreskin that are problematic in the context of bris milah. Basar achofet. Alright, I'm not going into detail here, but it's basically different things that are ma'akiv. Basar achofet rova atar. Man, I've gotten kind of enough of going into freaking detail on awkward stuff. I prepare my oh my god. I prepare Babylon Talmud in grooves. I have a groove, maybe I mentioned it. I have a groove every day at 3:30 in the morning. That's my first groove of the day. It's on the I schedule it every day for 3:30 in the morning. I groove with Patrick and sometimes some other people too. Well, usually some other people, but Patrick is like Kavua, and then this morning it was Anna. Sometimes it's Tirza, sometimes Abigail. Anyways, so the thing is, so the people on Groove, they know that I'm preparing my podcast, and sometimes they ask me oh, what's your podcast? Anyways, Sofa Shel Davar, there are people from Groove who listen to the podcast sometimes, and I get interesting shilas about awkward stuff. Yeah, Anna recently asked me, Anna, are you listening to this? Anna really asked me, is it really true that people with crushed body parts are not allowed to marry other people? Anna, it's true. What do you want me to tell you? What do you want me to tell you? I don't know. What am I supposed to do with this stuff? Friends, what a basar chofes rova atara. I don't know, different parts of the foreskin. Ve'ein ochel b'truma, and if you didn't remove everything, so then you can't eat truma. Amar Ravina v'tem Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rab basar chofes rov gova shel atara, the height of midbar. My time lomahol. How come they didn't do bris milah in the desert? Ibaisem mishum chulsha the orcha, either because they were tired. Or because there wasn't this very pleasant northern wind. Titania, that all the 40 years that the Yidden were in the desert, this northern, very pleasant northern wind did not blow. My time out come, either because they were in time out, they were in trouble because of the Egel. Because we don't want the clouds of glory to scatter, so there wasn't that northern wind. So just like the Yidden in the desert didn't do bris milah because there wasn't this northern wind, so on a day that's stormy or not good vibes, so we don't do bris milah, and we also don't bloodlet. But nowadays that people do these things, right? They do bris milah. Nobody checks the weather before a bris, because Shomer P'sayim Hashem, that the Eibishter takes care of the foolhardy. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Aleph Masechet Yevamos. What do you want me to tell you? We learned about truma and how orals are not supposed to eat trumas. Yeah, and then we got into kind of bris milah in that context. Friends, peace out, bye.